Welcome back to App Stories. Today's show is sponsored by Pillow, Sourcegraph, and Collide. I'm John Voorhees, and with me today is a very special guest, Jason Snell of Six Colors. Hey, Jason.
Ciao, John.
Oh, look at you! You're on the West Coast, Jason. You can't be chowing from.
Let's do lunch.
Let's do lunch. There you go. Oh, well, we can hang 10 together or something like that in Frisco. I know all the San Francisco people love it when you call it Frisco.
Oh, well, there's an article in the San Francisco Chronicle today that says that Frisco's okay and San Fran is the worst. I don't know if I agree with that either. But
I don't know if I agree. They're not. Neither one of them are pretty good. But
it's really more about Cupertino, or should I say Supertino?
Supertino. All right. Yeah, it is. It is. We've got an Apple event coming up. And before long, you and I are going to be writing macOS Ventura reviews. And so I thought maybe today.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I know. I hate it. I'll tell you, I hate having this thing hanging over my head all summer, especially when it comes this time of the year. When Federico's is coming to a conclusion. That's why he's not here today. He's finishing up. Yeah. He has been writing till 4 a.m. every day, and I can attest that last night he sent me a text message at 10 p.m. Eastern time, which he should not have been up, but he was. But yeah, he's getting close to the finish line, and I'm looking at it and thinking I'm nowhere near as far along as I want to be because I'm doing a bunch of other stuff. So it's just going to be a busy couple of months.
I delegated my iOS review to Dan Morin, who's coming back from his paternity leave soon. But that leaves me with the iPad and Mac reviews, both of which.
Oh boy!
But it is funny to do the macOS review and to have this weird period where they're shipping one of the OSs and yet your OS that you're covering isn't quite there yet, and the betas sort of were suspended or have been slowed because they're like finishing the iOS betas, and it's a whole thing. I also do a book about photos, and it's again one of those things where what I really don't want to do is take all the screenshots and then take them all again because they change a bunch of if even not features, just like a bunch of visual things in the last betas, and you're like, I got to take all my screenshots again. So yeah, we are in this interregnum where it's probably the version that's going to ship is probably pretty close to being done, but we still have probably multiple betas left to go before we see it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it really does feel like Ventura really isn't as finished as I thought it would be maybe by September. But part of that is iOS, and part of that is iPad OS in particular with Stage Manager and the issues there. So it'll be interesting to see when we actually get it. I think we'll also probably this fall see a second hardware event, which is going to complicate things even further. But events are fun. We're going to get ourselves
it's good.
New iPads, new Macs.
We can't complain all summer that nothing is happening, and then complain in the fall when things are happening. Right? You can't do both. You
can't have that one both ways. But I thought we should talk about Ventura and what our experiences have been like so far. And you mentioned that you do a photos book. And I feel really bad for you, Jason, because Apple has really, really changed photos a lot on you since you started that book. I mean, you've seen some significant changes. How long have you been doing that? About 5 years, maybe?
About as long as photos has existed. So 6-7 years? It's a long time.
Oh, wow.
And in that time, I'll tell you, this year is actually not going to be so bad because there's one major feature that changed. Mm-hmm. But what has happened in the last 3 or 4 years as I had this book is when I started, this book was about photos on the Mac. Just the photo, like iPhoto, it became photos. Time for a new book. I wrote this book about photos. But what has happened in the last few years is the Mac version and the iPad version and the iOS version have all begun to converge.
Right.
And I started having more and more, like first it was like, okay, I need to mention the iPad and iOS versions. And then it was, I need a section about the iPad and iOS versions. And last year was finally when I said, okay, I have to go through top to bottom and make this book about photos on all platforms. And instead of having it be like, to do this, you click, and we assume it's on the Mac, and then there's a little sidebar that says, on the iPhone, you do it this way. It just says, here's how you do this. On the Mac, do this. On the iPad, do this. On the iPhone, do this. Throughout the book. Because really, at this point, the app is not very different across, especially the iPad and the Mac. It's mostly interface quirks that are about the size of the screen you're on. The iPhone, a lot of times the Mac and iPad instructions are exactly the same. And it's the iPhone that's different because the iPhone screen is so much smaller. So
Right.
Apple really has evolved that app to get it to be as close to converging as it possibly can. And that's been interesting to watch firsthand. This year, though, other than iCloud shared photo library, it's mostly the same as it was last year. That they really put most of their effort into that one feature.
Yeah, that's true. I think your point about the convergence of photos is interesting because it's something I think about a lot in how we cover the OSs at Mac Stories too, because, Federico's writing an iOS and iPad OS review and I'm writing the Mac OS one. And, notes, reminders, all those system apps are very close to each other now on all those platforms. And to a degree, we're repeating each other's work, which maybe someday we'll just do them as standalones. I don't know. And have just, cover one, have one person cover one thing.
I feel like that's not to get too meta about how coverage about this stuff works, but I think that is the future. I think ultimately the right way to approach it is going to be that you review iCloud photo library and you write a bunch of little feature reviews that are interlinked that are about all of the new features on Apple's platforms because they do vary from but there's so much that's repeated that, like, if you want to talk about the changes in reminders with like and smart folders and things like that in reminders and notes, like, you can do that, but like they're pretty much the same on all the platforms.
Right.
So you're just going to be restating what what you said over there or what Federico said over there when you're writing it over here, and it does get a little bit silly. There are differences, but there are way more things in common than there are different.
Absolutely, and that we have kind of started migrating that direction a little bit with some of the summer series stuff we do, where we
for sure.
we focus on a particular topic. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Pillow. More and more studies show that a good night's sleep can help improve your health and overall well-being in more ways than you can ever imagine. Pillow is a simple app that can help you become more aware of your sleep patterns and make informed decisions to improve your sleep quality. All you have to do is wear your Apple Watch while you sleep. Pillow will track and analyze your sleep automatically and give you a full report in the morning. If you want to use Pillow with just an iPhone or an iPad, you can do that too with the press of a button before going to bed. And if you have an Apple Watch, you can get important information about your heart rate trend, variability, heart rate dip, and blood oxygen levels for each sleep session. You can even record sounds like sleep talking, sleep apnea, snoring, and other noises that might be affecting your sleep. If you have an Apple Watch Series 6 or newer, Pillow will display information about the intensity of those sounds for each sleep session and give you a rating of the exposure. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you make informed decisions to improve your sleep. Pillow comes with a dedicated section where you can discover trends, get personalized insights, sleep tips, and easily compare your sleep metrics with your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and other metrics. If you want to wind down and relax before going to bed or listen to something throughout the night, Pillow comes with an expanding collection of sleep aid sounds, guided meditations, bedtime stories, and music produced specifically for sleep. There's even a power nap mode if you have a chance to take a nap during the day. Pillow can wake you up using your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad at the lightest possible sleep stage using its smart alarm feature. And starting with watchOS 6, Pillow's battery consumption is minimal too. Last but not least, Pillow is very privacy-minded. All of your sleep and audio data is encrypted and stored on your device and your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. You don't need to register or create an account to use Pillow either. You can use it anonymously, and it doesn't collect or send your personal data anywhere else. Pillow is free to download from the App Store and comes with a set of terrific features for free. If you want to try Pillow's premium features, there's also an option to start a 7-day free trial. Just visit pillow.app to get started today. Again, that URL to try out this fantastic sleep app is pillow.app. Our thanks to Pillow for their support of the show. Let's get back to photos. And I do want to talk about iCloud shared photo library with you because that's one of the things that I'm writing about for our summer series. It's not out yet, but I've been playing around with this and I've been pretty impressed with it. Have you been trying it?
Yeah, I'm also impressed with it. I think it is, especially given what it is, because what they've essentially done is just grafted on a second library that is in the cloud, and then added a bunch of UI to let you view, essentially library A, library B, or A plus B. But like, it's not like, obviously Photos was not built with this in mind.
No,
so they had to figure out how to add it. And rather than do something where there's like, everybody's got a library and then you can share amongst yourselves, they've decided to create this like extra library that is accessible from multiple other accounts. So you've got your own, and then you've got this shared library that is different. It's not the same library, and things can move in or out of it from any direction, right? And I think they've done a good job with it. I don't think it's confusing. I think that you can, once you set it up, you could just leave it as seeing A plus B and not worry about it too much.
Right.
They have really prioritized giving users the power about what they share, which I think was, when I talked to them about this years ago now, I said, why aren't you doing a family library? And they said, the challenge is not everybody wants to share every photo they take with the rest of their family. So how do we handle that? And they have gone beyond, I think, what would have been the easy answers, which are you have to share manually into it, or everything shares. And they've tried to use some of their intelligent technology in terms of analyzing the contents, analyzing the locations, analyzing timestamps and people in photos to try and come up with other ways of doing essentially sharing suggestions. So it's not all or nothing. But like, yeah, I'm impressed. If you didn't know it was there and it was just set to A plus B, you wouldn't really notice the difference. It just true. Is fine. It works fine.
Yeah, it really does. And, to me, it's like, it's a combination of both really excellent engineering and design, because it just works. A couple of nights ago, I was, very nervous about testing this during the betas because I've got a lot of photos. I have something like 47,000 photos or so. And the last thing I want to do is screw up my entire family's photo library and have to explain that to the rest of my family. But I finally put my wife's iPad mini on iPadOS 16, and I told her, I'm going to do this thing, and I think you'll like it if it all goes well. And so I set it up. I got it ready to go, went through the whole setup process, which is the design aspect of this. I think that the walkthrough explaining to you what's going to happen and how you decide what you're going to share and what you're not going to share is really clear, and it gave me, I think, a lot of confidence in doing it, that I wasn't oversharing. And it even gives you like the option to preview what you're going to share before you actually share it, all of which I think is really, really well designed. But the actual act of moving these images around into a shared library, it took a while. I mean, I started this not long before I went to bed for the night, and it was clear it was going to take, hours, not minutes. But by the time I got up in the morning, I'd shared 25,000 photos, and it was pretty seamless. I didn't have any hiccups, really.
Yeah. For a thing that was not what it was intended to be when the thing was designed, when the app and service were designed, they have done a very careful, good job of not only designing it, but architecting it where
right.
It does what it says on the label. I mean, I think sharing settings are flexible enough that you can actually do like the thing that my wife and I always wanted to do, which is basically like, if I take any pictures, put them in the library, right? You can do that.
Right.
But you could also do something like with our daughter, where she might set it up so that she can add things to the library if she wants to, or when she's with us, those photos get contributed to the library, which is a good use case, right? Which is like, my daughter is a senior in college now. She's living her life. The things that she's doing, living her life, are not things that are part of the family photo library, nor should they be. But if we go on a family trip together, or we go visit her and do stuff with her, the way Apple has built this feature, it will actually suggest to her those photos to be put in the family pile. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it works really well that way too. And I had some of the same things I was thinking about when I was doing this. I set it up, and the photos that I shared out of my library were of like our kids and our close family members. So it wasn't the whole thing. And then going forward, I can do kind of like, as you were saying, you can either tap the button in the camera app and decide, that you're going to share a particular set that you're doing or whether you're together, those kind of considerations. I also think it's nice how Apple figured out a way to let you unwind this too. Whether a couple breaks up or maybe one of your kids gets married and starts family of their own. The thing is that there can only be 6 people in these shared libraries, and you can only be in one of them at a time. Right. So if something like that happens, you might want to, leave a particular shared library and start another one. And you can do that. And when you do, you can either keep all the photos that are in the shared library in your library, your personal library, or you can just get back the ones that you contributed. So I thought that was pretty thoughtful too.
Yeah, I can complain about the fact that this feature didn't appear 5 years ago when it probably should have, but I've got to give them credit. When I asked them why it wasn't there, they gave a long list of reasons why they felt it wasn't appropriate to just have a basic sharing system. And this delivers on essentially everything they said to me, 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. So they've obviously been thinking about this for a long time. And yeah, I think it's going to be good. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens when this rolls out to the general public. But right now, I'm optimistic about it because, in the end, there are a lot of people who are like, who are like us, who we have family members who take pictures. And like for us, we do a calendar at the end of the year for the next year using pictures from the previous year taken in the month that's going to be on the calendar. And that means that we have this thing in December where I have to plug my wife's iPhone into my Mac and import all her photos because she wants my photos and her photos in order to build that calendar. And it's like, that's so dumb. And there's so many cases like that will now just be wiped away. Now, is it going to be the case that somebody's going to write a news story sometime in 2023, probably, where there's like husband and wife, are getting a divorce because his girlfriend showed up in their shared library or something like that? Well, yeah, but that's somebody whose settings were wrong. Like, and by default, that sort of stuff doesn't happen. So, it's meant the whole, whether it's something nefarious or for me, it's going to be like, you don't need to see pictures I take of computers for my website, right? I don't need to put that in the family library. So I'll keep those to myself. And the fact that they built it in, we haven't even mentioned it, but that they built it into the camera app. So the other thing you can do, just like you can toggle live photos, is you can toggle whether your camera shots are going into the shared library or your own library. So you have, as you're taking pictures, you have the ability to say, this is not for the shared library, or this is definitely for the shared library.
Right. No, that's all really good. I did, it's not perfect. I will note that when I did the sharing, a recent vacation of ours, I looked at the photos and there were some charts from the Apple earnings season in there because I was on vacation for the last quarter's financial results and I was sitting in our hotel room putting together a few charts after our day of touring, and those got shared because I was with my family, and that it was doing as intended, but I wouldn't normally share like the last 10 years of Apple revenue with my wife and kids. So
exactly. And I was thinking about like my example of my daughter. If we go visit her in Eugene, is she going to, she goes out, we're there to move in our son. She's living there. She goes out to a party that night. Right. But we're there. Like there is that question of like, depending on your settings, do those get shared? Because like we were all together when we weren't together in that moment. And those are the details. Apple has worked on them, but yeah, I think that's going to be one of the bigger challenges is how do we get some added awareness, right? Awareness of where these photos are going. And the good news is, I mean, you can pull them back. It's like, you don't have to keep them there.
Right. No, I think overall it's really well done. There are going to be some edge cases for sure, but I was pretty pleased with the results. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Collide. Collide is an endpoint security solution that uses the most powerful, untapped resource in all of IT, end users. Old school device management tools like MDMs force disruptive agents onto employees' devices that slow performance and treat privacy as an afterthought. Collide does things differently. Instead of forcing changes on users, Collide notifies your team via Slack when devices are insecure and gives them step-by-step instructions on how to solve problems. By reaching out to employees via friendly Slack messages and educating them about the company's policies, Collide can help you build a culture where everyone contributes to security because everyone understands how and why to do it. For IT admins, Collide provides a single dashboard that lets you monitor the security of your entire fleet, whether they're running on Macs, Windows, or Linux. That visibility makes it easy to prove compliance to your auditors, customers, and leadership. You can meet your compliance goals by putting your users first. Just visit collide.com/appstories to find out how. If you follow that link, they'll hook you up with a goodie bag, including a t-shirt, just for activating a free trial. That's KOLIDE.com/appstories. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show. Jason, why don't we talk a little bit about Stage Manager? Because Stage Manager to me this year is really interesting because it's been kind of a mess on the iPad, but I've been pretty happy with it on Ventura. Have you been using it much?
I've used it a little bit. I find it really frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
It's close, right? I feel like it's closer on the Mac than it is on the iPad.
Yeah.
Because the Mac has a windowing metaphor and infrastructure, and like there's so much there that the iPad has none. So the iPad is they're like trying to make it up as they go, which is probably it's a much harder job. I won't judge it. I'll just say it's a much harder job there to do that because you have to ask the question like, how do we minimize a window or move a window? And on the Mac, like we know how to do all of those things, and yet it still feels to me like there's a lot of stuff that's missing. Like I like the idea. I think it's a much more discoverable and at least for me usable thing than something like Spaces because they're all visible. Like
right.
I always feel like with Spaces it's out of sight and it's out of mind, and that's why I never use Spaces. And I don't like Spaces. But and if people do, that's great. But like for me, it never really worked. So the idea that you've got these little stacks of stages off on the side that are groups of apps and you move between them, I can see how that's a good idea. However, for me, it all falls down in the management of it, that I find myself wanting to put something in a group or take something out of a group or move. The one that really kills me is move between the groups with the keyboard shortcut. And that's when I'm like, am I missing something or can you not do that? And I have asked around, and a bunch of the stuff that I want to do, nobody's found it out or it's not in there. But like
it's mostly not in there, I think.
Yeah. And so that's what kills it for me is like if I could set up all my little stages and then do some keyboard shortcut to move among them, or trackpad gesture or whatever, I would be much happier with it. But instead it's like, no, you got to take your mouse all the way over to the left, click on one of the things and bring it up. And then likewise, like sending things in and out and all of that, sort of like the Mac windowing interface wasn't really made for that, and they haven't revised it, right? The other thing they could do is really embrace it and change up and maybe even add items to the little stoplights up in the corner to do some of this stuff. And other than redefining what the yellow circle does when you're in Stage Manager, the rest of it is sort of like just not touched. So I'm frustrated because I feel like it's got a lot of potential, but that there are a whole bunch of things that just it doesn't do.
Yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head because it really is, especially the lack of keyboard shortcuts to do things and the difficulty of moving things on and off of stages that has frustrated me as well. I've filed a bunch of feedback on this, and it's little stuff. It's like, especially when you think of it from the standpoint of the iPad. On the iPad, as buggy as Stage Manager might be there right now, you can drag apps onto a stage out of Spotlight Search, for instance, and that's really handy. You can't do that on a Mac. You can't like drag something out of your dock. It'll just remove it from your dock. It doesn't. It's just the Mac's not built to do that. So if you have an app that you open and it's on a stage and you want to add a second app to that stage, if it's not already in your recents, you now have to open that app, whether through the Finder or the dock or however, and then that makes the first app go off to the left. Now you've got the second app. Now you've got to drag the first app back, and now you've got your pair. And that, to me, is just way too manual and time-consuming. Once you have those stages, it's really nice, especially if you're only, there's six recents in that left sidebar. Once you have those set up, it's very easy to move back and forth. It would be nicer if you could do it with a keyboard shortcut, but you can click on them and they're all set up and fine. But getting it set up in the first place is difficult. And it would be nice if not only that there were more ways to pair them, but there was maybe it was built into, say, shortcuts where you could automate. I always want to open up Safari next to Notes or something like that when I start my day.
Yeah, I keep thinking about wanting to drag a window into a item that's in the little side dock.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way to do that. Like, I can't pick up, what I want to do is pick up a window and drop it into one of those. It's
right.
Like, nope. You can go the other way, or you can open a window and then switch and then drag it back. But again, not particularly elegant and kind of frustrating. And then also there's on both iOS and macOS, I feel this way, where it's like things get opened in weird places like that I don't expect. Mm-hmm. And I know that some of that is training me to understand how it works, but part of it is also that I think that it suggests that there's a level of sort of intuition that I have as a longtime Mac user about what's going to happen when I click somewhere that Stage Manager undercuts. And that is the problem me or is the problem Stage Manager? And I'm willing to accept that maybe the problem is me, but I feel like maybe the problem is that Stage Manager is anticipating something about the Mac interface that decades of history of the Mac interface suggest is not the case.
Yeah, it's a little aggressive in that way. I see that too. I mean, it's what I do like about it though on the Mac is you've got more flexibility in resizing your windows, of course, which is useful. So you've got that. I've been using it basically full time since June. and I do like it in general. I mean, I think to me it feels like a cross between Spaces and the hide all others option in the menu, right? It's like what's nice about it is that I can have one or two apps that I want to work in, and everything else is gone, including the clutter on my desktop, and that's all taken care of for me. I don't need to rely on a third-party app. I don't have to rely on a macro. I don't have to do anything. It's just kind of cleaned up, and I don't lose windows beneath a pile of other apps.
And most people, even with a pile of windows on their screen, aren't using all of those apps at once. They're probably This is the part of the premise that I really like, is the idea that you're probably only using 2 or 3 of those windows at a time. It's unlikely that you've got a workflow where you have to go from window A to B to C to D to E to F, right? Like that's probably not what your life is like. And if it is, I'm sorry, and turn off Stage Manager then. But for most of us, I don't think that's the case. You're using 2 or 3 or 4 open windows, maybe, and you're probably then using another set to do some other things. And what Stage Manager is doing is saying, maybe they don't all need to be right in front of you at once, and that it's actually less cluttered if you have Slack and Discord open together, and that you have Safari and your text editor open together, or Notes or something like that. Like that there are natural sets that work together, that if you can pair them all, you can, and then switch among them, it actually fits better with like how you are really working on your Mac. I buy that completely. I think that that's probably true. The challenge is how, like, if it takes me a minute or two to build my spaces and put them together and then tear them down and have to build them together, if that's taking minutes at a time to set it up, and that's overhead that I don't want to spend. So that's why I keep thinking that, like, the real challenge here is, you mentioned shortcuts, it's automating or creating interface gestures that make it easier to build up these workspaces and tear them down, because right now, and switch among them, right? Like that's the part that really gets me, is that the command tab seems to have been passed over as a part of this, and command tilde seems to have been passed over as a part of this. And it's like, okay, there needs to be a move to the next stage gesture or keyboard shortcut. And like that would solve so much for me. And yet here we are in September now, and it's still not in there. And that, like, I hope it's going to be in there by the time it ships. And I hope there's a way to send a window to a particular stage at some point here too. But I don't know. So like, I'm very optimistic of it as a feature, but every time I try to use it, I get frustrated because I'm one of those people who, I hate it when I have to do the infrastructure around productivity, right? Like this idea, because, people can get off on being productive, but in fact, they're not being productive. They're setting up their system.
Right.
And I am completely allergic to system setup kind of stuff.
I'm right there with you on that
right?
one.
And so that's my objection to Stage Manager right now is I don't like the amount of manual work I have to do to get it to function and to switch among them. And if it was a little more, just if the skids were greased a little bit more, I would be much more inclined to like it, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SourceGraph. So you've hired a brilliant developer. That's great, but now you've got to get them onboarded. And if your company is growing, that can be a big task every single time. One of the biggest challenges for new hires is to get up to speed with the projects that their teams are working on. This can be tricky if code bases you're working in are already large. Thankfully, SourceGraph makes it easy to move fast, even in those big code bases. Developers know that knowledge is most useful when it's findable. Centralization helps, but given the fact that most companies store data in more than one place, how are you going to get knowledge to the people who need it? As a code intelligence platform, SourceGraph gives developers what they need to drive their own learning over time and in different situations. Teams without SourceGraph need to rely on asking colleagues and reviewing out-of-date documentation, which is cumbersome and time-consuming. But with SourceGraph, every developer can search through millions of repositories for specific code, saving time for themselves and everyone else, so that when questions do come up, you know it's the important stuff. SourceGraph was created to make developers' lives easier, and today they work with the leading companies in every industry, including 3 out of the 5 top tech companies, plus PayPal, Uber, Plaid, GE, Reddit, and Atlassian. Visit about.sourcegraph.com to learn more today. That's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world use SourceGraph and to see what it can do for yours. Or click the link in the show notes so that they know you heard about them from us. Our thanks to SourceGraph for their support of the show. Well, you mentioned shortcuts. Let's talk about shortcuts, because I'm starting to get a little concerned about shortcuts on the Mac, because I was really surprised, like everybody else, that we got things like AppleScript integration on the Mac, which I think is a terrific feature. I mean, don't get me wrong on that, anyone, that I really do like the fact that I have the ability to use AppleScript, because, on iOS, that's just a dead end that you can't get around. The thing is, though, I'm starting to wonder if maybe AppleScript is already becoming a bit of a crutch to put off new system level actions and shortcuts for Mac, because we really didn't get any this year, at least not yet as of the betas as we're speaking right now. And, even there've even been other actions that have been added to iOS and iPadOS over the last couple of months, like some of the Safari things that we're not seeing on the Mac yet.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that last year's shortcuts feature set would have been welcomed as this year's shortcuts feature set. And I'm glad they got it all in there, and then it's sort of been progressing. You're right; it is something to keep an eye on. I keep thinking like there's another shoe to drop on the scripting side, whether it's like a formal embrace of JavaScript, or whether they're trying to invent some new, lightweight version of Swift that does scripting, or I don't know what. You're right. I feel like what I keep thinking is that I understand how actions as a concept, the individual building blocks of shortcuts on iOS, it makes sense that they are little blobs of code that are contributed by the system or by apps. I get it. I wonder, when I look at it on the Mac, that's the one where I stop and I think, maybe what needs to happen on the Mac is that there needs to be a system method of enabling user contributable shortcuts actions.
Okay.
Because whether it's code or a shell script or an Apple script or a JavaScript or whatever, like, part of my frustration is when I'm building these scripts, I end up doing like, okay, I need an Apple script here, or I need a shell script here.
Right.
And I wonder if there might be, and maybe Apple doesn't want to do it because it would be Mac only, but like, I would love a scenario where I could, just as I build automator actions that are services on macOS, wouldn't it be great if I could contribute and then share with other people a shortcut action that enables something, right? That would be a very Mac-like thing to do, but it's not in there. And you're right. A lot of things are. I'm a little less concerned about AppleScript because I think in the end, AppleScript is going to fade away, and then Apple's going to have to come up with some other method that is blessed for controlling individual apps. And having the shell there is also good. And I don't think the shell access is ever going to go away because I think the Mac is going to have it forever. But like, I would like there to be more. And I'm worried about when I look at something like Audio Hijack, which is great because the new version of Audio Hijack supports shortcuts. What gives me pause is that Audio Hijack doesn't really support shortcuts.
No, it supports JavaScript.
It supports JavaScript where there's a run JavaScript pathway.
Yes.
And that is like, I get why they did it. I'm glad they did it. But my concern is that we're going to see a lot of apps that just say, here, pass me JavaScript from shortcuts. And that's not any better than passing AppleScript from shortcuts.
No, it's not. That's the way, Omni Group has gone as well. And I'm not a fan of it personally. And I do wonder whether other developers will kind of take the lead, because obviously those are both important developers in the Mac community. And I feel like it's just not the right way to go long term, but I totally get why they did it.
But imagine now if third parties could come up and write like an Audio Hijack action pack that is just using Audio Hijack scripting engine, but you could import that and then use those in your shortcuts. Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, that would be very nice.
Right?
That would be very nice. Yeah, the thing is that the system actions we got last year were basically automator actions. It was the most popular automator actions, and that was fantastic because it was a great bridge from the past to the future. And to have nothing really this year is just. The automators' actions weren't deep enough themselves, and now we're kind of in the same position with shortcuts. And I feel like that's really got I'd like to see some movement forward there.
Yeah, and I should mention, because I did an episode of Upgrade about automation, and we talked to Federico and Rose Orchard and Matthew Casanelli, and on there we talked about subroutines too. The idea of like. Sure. You can run a shortcut now, but then you end up in this situation where you're like, well, I want to share this shortcut with you, but I really actually need to share 8 shortcuts with you.
Right.
And it's laborious to get all those iCloud links and all of that. And when I talk about actions and I talk about subroutines, they could be the same thing, right?
Sure.
Shortcuts, what we really want shortcuts to have, I think, is this ability to to build and bundle some functionality that can be used somewhere else. And like, I don't need to have necessarily build an Audio Hijack action if I could build an Audio Hijack shortcut that takes input and generates output, and that is a subroutine. It could just as easily be considered a subroutine as an action. But again, it's just like shortcuts isn't doing any of that. So I'm happy. I think it's interesting that you mentioned this, because on one level, I'm actually kind of okay with them not doing a lot this year, because I feel like just getting it on the platform and in a pretty functional way last year was such a big step that I'm willing for it to wait a year. But I think we are already gearing up to have that question for next year, which is where is shortcuts going? Like, where is it going? Like, right. I know they've changed the app to a new framework. They're doing a lot of work there. There's a lot of stuff to do in the background. Okay, but this was all sold as the first step in Apple's long-term future of user automation. And I'm now at the point, and I know you're clearly at this point now, where the question is, okay, what's step 2?
Yeah, exactly. And I totally acknowledge and get the fact that Shortcuts for Mac was in a pretty rough shape when Monterey launched, and there was a lot of work to be done to get it into the shape it's in today. So it's understandable why there haven't been a lot more deeper changes this year. And I'm also very happy of all the to see all the third-party developers who have gotten involved, because there's been greater adoption than I ever really expected, a lot more quickly than I expected. So that all is great. But I do think that we need to start seeing signs sooner rather than later as to where, what Apple's going to do next on Shortcuts.
Yeah.
All right, Jason, let's close out by talking about system settings a little bit. I can't let you go without talking to you about this just a little bit. And I actually don't know where to start, because it's kind of a hot mess, as I think has been discussed a lot of places on Upgrade and many other podcasts and articles here and there. But I look at it, and the thing that I think is most fundamentally a problem is that somehow they decided to design it like an iPhone app. And I don't understand that, because there are other Swift UI-based apps like Shortcuts where that isn't the case. Right. And that's just a design decision more than anything else.
I would like to pick it apart even further, though, and say what I don't think the problem is that a bunch of people who've used the Mac a long time now have to get used to something that looks more like the settings app on iOS or iPadOS. Like, first off, we all are familiar with iPadOS and iOS settings. And so having Apple try to unify its interface there, I think it's reasonable. That interface is more than 2 decades old. It's been since the very beginning of macOS 10 back in the day. Revisiting it and having it be in a more familiar metaphor, I'm okay with.
Yeah, same.
But I want to pick apart what you said, because what you said is the iPhone interface, and I think that is the problem, which is at no point does it seem that this was reconceived for Mac screens, which start at 13 inches and are widescreen and go up from there. And it's designed like an iPhone interface. It's tall. It's a single tall list with content, in this case, like an iPad, content on the side. And I mean, I've written a bunch of articles about this now, but that's where it breaks down for me. You
can't change the width at all.
Yeah, you can't change the width. You can change the height, which is insane, but you can't change the width. So this is my issue is they chose to change the metaphor, but they didn't choose to change the organizational structure. And I would argue that if you start to think about it, it actually calls into question the organizational structure of settings on all of Apple's platforms. Because
very good point.
Apple's settings are, I dare anyone to look at the system settings app on Ventura and look in the sidebar. There's more than 24 items in the sidebar. They're in groups with little spaces between the groups. The groups aren't labeled. So my homework for you is, 1, what are each of those groups? How would you label them? Why are they together? And then 2, in each group, why are they in the order they're in? Because they're not alphabetical. They're in some order. And I'm telling you, I'm ready to be schooled by somebody who's got a really great reason why, it all makes sense. But I'm telling you, it doesn't make any sense. The order was either arbitrary, or it was because of something in history that, like, in 2005, we added this, and so it went at the bottom. And that they have done this reskin of the app and not changed any of that, not seemingly given any real thought to the fact that they have multiple levels of hierarchy, that you go into general, but they don't display the interim settings. So you can end up in a place where it says general on the left column, and then you're 2 levels down on the right pane, and the intermediate list is invisible. So you actually can't see the whole hierarchy that you're browsing. Also, the fact that some of those panes are packed with a lot of unrelated settings. And there's a question of, like, why not let them all have their own setting? I know that makes more items, but you could organize them. And, it makes me feel like they know that everybody's just going to give up and search, because it doesn't make any sense any other way. And while search is great. I'm glad that you can search and find the setting you want. But, like, if you're going to pretend that there's an organizational structure and a hierarchy, you ought to make an attempt to organize it. Or in my piece on 6 Colors that I wrote about this, you should just make it all disappear and just have it be a search box when you open the settings app, because that's essentially what they've done, is they've made it so that you just have to search to find things, because nothing is where you think it's going to be. There's no organizational structure, and it's really easy to be somewhere deep down in one of those general settings and not understand that there are other general settings, because the middle step is hidden.
Right. No, and you're right. I mean, it's interesting. There are obviously a lot of visual glitches too in the design, but those are the kind of things that can get cleaned up. Before we started, I know you and I are both recording on laptops next to our regular Macs because of Ventura. And one of the things that I did before you and I got started was I've been annoyed because when I've been recording, my screen will on the Mac I'm not using will go to the screensaver, and I want to have some notes on the big screen as I'm recording on the laptop. So I thought, I'm going to change when the screensaver kicks in, and that was a bit of a challenge to find where that is in settings. I thought, all right, well, I'll go to screensaver. No, it's not there.
Screensaver. Yeah, you would think maybe screensaver would be where the screensaver timeout is.
Right, because I had it set to 5 minutes and I wanted it longer, so I went there first.
So energy saver, right? It's probably an energy saver.
Yep, that's where I looked too. Nope, not there either. It's not there at all. It's not in displays. You know where it is, Jason?
Oh man, I actually don't even know now.
It's in lock screen, which is below energy saver. It's in lock screen. I'm not even sure what lock screen means in the scheme of things. I mean, that's where it is.
Mm-hmm. I would make a strong argument that the Mac doesn't really have a lock screen.
No, I don't. Not really. No, not in the sense that I think of a lock screen. That whole group is interesting. That group is lock screen, Touch ID and password, and users and groups.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's going on with that group.
And by the way, switching a user, not in users and groups, it's in lock screen. All your multi-user switching settings are in lock screen.
Yeah. So
it is, and that's my argument too. Is like, well, I'll give you one. Is it? Where is it? The default browser setting is in desktop and dock.
Okay.
I love that one. That's a good one. Like, why is it there? And I don't have a good answer for why desktop and dock is where you set what your default web browser is, but that's where it is. Fortunately, you can search for it and it will get you there. But yeah, it's a real shame. Like I don't want to criticize the interface. I think that using a more modern interface on it is fine.
Right.
I don't. It's a missed opportunity. That's really what it comes down to. Was system preferences was old and a mess because it was something that had been built up layer by layer by layer by layer over 20 years, where they kept adding new things to it. And you end up in these situations where you've got a pane that opens up, and that's very modal, right? You've got all those individual panes, and then you click on one and it all goes away, and now you're just in one.
Right.
And then in there, you often would have like its own tabs plus a scrolling list on the side that you could click on that would open up another pane that also had tabs. Like it was a mess. So it totally needed to be fixed. And what's disappointing is that the resulting app doesn't really fix any of that.
It's also a mess. It's just a different mess.
It's a slightly different mess. What really amazes me is some of the stuff is in different places now.
Yeah.
But they still don't make any sense. It just is. Why did it move at all? So it's just, it's real disappointing. And part of me thinks that there was I like to believe that the people who work on this at Apple know its shortcomings, but there was some sort of a command from higher up that said, we want it to be just like on the iPad, so make it like that. And like, why nobody said, that column browser in the Finder that Steve Jobs loved so much that he brought it over from Next? Like, a column browser for a hierarchical system setting app would actually work pretty well. And nobody said, let's do it that way. We got to keep it in two panes because, it's not like Macs have giant screens that have lots of width that you could use. I don't know. It's too bad. The truth is it's settings and you can search and you can find everything and it works okay. My bigger question is just like, why is so little care apparently taken for something that every Mac user has to live with? And it's just like, it could be better. And it feels like somebody at Apple at some level either doesn't know it could be better or doesn't care it can be better. And that's what bothers me about it.
Yeah, there's so many things going on here. And I feel like, first of all, yes, the original system preferences was kind of its own mess. This is also a mess.
Yeah.
I think it suffers from probably the mandate of making it Swift UI.
Sure.
I think that, the idea of this being a non-resizable, at least left to right window, doesn't make any sense. The whole thing is a very hard design problem because there's a lot of information being stuffed into a small amount of space,
right,
and it needs to be organized in a way that at least makes sense to most people. And it's just not there yet.
No.
And I think all those things together have really taken us from one problem to another disappointing problem, which is unfortunate.
And that's what makes me sad, is that this was your chance after 20 years to start anew and get it right, because next year you're going to have to add a bunch of settings to this, right? The problem of adding layers and layers of sediment will start again. So this is your chance to kind of sweep it away and do something fresh. And they seem to have not. They seem to have done the minimal effort to just get it over in this new metaphor, and not like. And I'm sympathetic to the argument of it shouldn't be complicated, but like the fact that there are 24 items in the sidebar suggests it's already complicated. And how complicated can it be when you have an item called desktop and dock that has within it dock and menu bar and Windows and apps and stage manager and default web browser and mission control in that order? Like those things shouldn't be together.
Yeah, no, I
and
know.
Yet they are. And that's the simplified version that still has 24 options. So I don't know. I feel bad because this seems like it could have been a really good project to improve the life of Mac users.
Right.
And if this was the best they could do in this time frame, what's the rush? System preferences have been around forever. Wait a year and do it right. But and that, if I don't want to beat this thing even more bloody than it already is, but I will just say this, which is it gives me pause because it makes me wonder about Apple's priorities, that they would think that this was okay and that it would be good enough to ship, because it's bad. And it makes me sad that they think that it's bad, but that people will take it and it'll be fine. And it doesn't matter, that it makes no sense if you start to think about it at all. And on top of that, I suspect that once they ship this, they're going to walk away from it and it'll never get improved. And they'll just be, sticking more things into it for the next 15 years.
Yeah, boy, I sure hope that isn't the case. I think the thing for me that is really disappointing is that I think the idea of having a settings app on the Mac that is familiar to people coming from the iPhone and the iPad, because there are, after all, more iPhone users than Mac users now, that's a good goal to have familiarity between the platforms. The problem is familiarity goes way deeper than just kind of skinning it to look like an iPhone setting app. It needs to also be usable, and it's now it's not very usable.
Right. And I would argue that if you start to apply these little bits of logic to the existing settings app on iPhone and iPad, you could probably make a list of ways that they, over the last decade plus, have also gotten a little too messy and should be revisited, right? Like there's probably some real settings organization that needs to be done across the board. But yeah, it's a shame. But again, I wrote a thing on Macworld that was critical of this, and somebody tweeted at me and said, it's just Mac users being grumpy that it looks like iOS. And it's like, no, I think making it look like iOS is good. I just wish that it was good. And it's not that what it looks like. It's that it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's why I think it's complicated, though, too, because I think that there are, for some people, maybe that is the case, but I don't think that actually is, in fact, the case. I think the case is that it runs much deeper than that.
System preferences doesn't look like macOS either. I mean, it looks like macOS 10.2, right?
True,
it doesn't.
True.
It does not. It has not moved with the times. There's no macOS interface that looks like system preferences anymore. So it wasn't, other than the familiarity that you've used it for 20 years. Like, it's not really defensible to keep that. Nobody would design it that way today. And so, like, replacing it with something else, it's a great opportunity for reorganization, for it all to make sense. And it's just a missed opportunity. That's what makes me sad about it. But the good news is everything is searchable. And you can find the thing you want, and it is functional. I will give it that. it is largely fun. It's got some weirdnesses in it that I don't like, and it's really inconsistent in some ways, but you can search and find what you want.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for joining me today for App Stories. It's been,
John.
We're here at episode 294, and we hadn't had you on before. And boy, I'm glad that we got you in before 300.
I'm happy to spell Federico a little bit too.
All right,
time to sleep and get ready to write the next chapter of his review.
Yes, thank you for that too, and thanks to our sponsors, Pillows, SourceGraph, and Collide. Jason, what are you up to these days? Where can people find you, and what are you up to?
Find me at Jason Snell on Twitter and sixcolors.com for all my writing and links to all my podcasts, and then there are many other podcasts at Relay FM and at theincomparable.com that you can check out, but it's mostly linked to from sixcolors.com.
All right, great. Thanks again. And I'm at John Voorhees, both on Twitter and Instagram. That's JohnVoorhees. Talk to you later, Jason.
Bye, John.